Today we're going to do a master copy and use this as an opportunity to practice hatching marks. This is a self-portrait by Rembrandt, and I'm doing a smaller scaled down version here in my sketchbook, and I'm just going to map this out and block it in with my graphite pencil. Using the straight construction lines just to make sure I get everything in the right place. I'm paying attention to the negative space, drawing the air around the figure as much as I'm drawing the figure itself. Thinking about how the features of the face line up with that center line going vertically through the picture. I think the eye on the left side of the face is just barely on the left side of that center line. So that center line lines up somewhere around the bridge of the nose, roughly, with the nose being on the right side. I don't want to get too detailed at this stage. I'm just looking at the big shapes and how they all relate. Don't think of this as a portrait just yet. We just want to try and arrange all the shapes in the way that Rembrandt did. We don't want to crop a master copy. We do master copies to learn from the masters. Even though this is a painting we're looking at and we're doing a drawing, there's still plenty to learn in the composition, the value structure, the gesture of the barks, and how we can create an echo of that with our hatching marks. But a master copy is going to be most useful to us if we really just submit to the way it was created by that master. We're not really trying to edit it or make any improvements. Rembrandt's pretty much one of the best painters in human history as far as I know, and I don't think I have much to offer improvement-wise. So we're just looking to learn from this. But again, it's a good opportunity for learning to hatch. Since this is a painting and not a drawing, we'll have to find our own way of translating what we see into those hatching lines. But at the same time, it's a really solid composition. A lot of that work is already done for us, so it gives us more room to focus on the hatching itself. So I'm using this micron pen. This is the larger size. It is size 08. So that line is going to be 0.5 millimeter wide at its largest point. They make smaller sizes too. You can use any kind of drawing tool for this if you want to use a mechanical pencil or a ballpoint pen. These micron pens are nice because the sensitivity of the line is really, really subtle, so you can get a lot of variation in that line weight. So I'm just lightly doing these contour hatching lines. So the contour hatching follows along the form of the object or shape that it's describing. So you can see along the top of this hat here, there's those really subtle curves, and these light hatching lines are just following along there. It's not a solid contour line that I'm just going to carve out of the picture plane. I'm looking at those forms and how there's some really subtle overlaps in the fabric of that hat. And at the same time, I'm just going over my pencil drawing, trying to map out where everything is going to land here. But just from the start, I'm going to use these hatching lines to navigate my way around. If you look close up to the reference, you'll see in the hair shape there's some really fine lines, and Rembrandt was, in a way, hatching with his paintbrush. There's a cast shadow on the forehead. The lines I'm drawing follow along the form of that forehead as if it were almost a cylinder shape. And then same with the eyebrows. These hatching lines they follow the shape of that form. They follow the direction that form is moving. I know the form itself isn't actually moving. The painting itself doesn't move at all. And even when he was painting it from life, looking at his own face, the eyebrow itself isn't going anywhere. But remember that the movement we can capture in a drawing is the movement of our vision through the composition. So that's another thing hatching can describe, is how we can move through a picture, and it can direct or guide that movement depending on how we draw the lines. If all of our hatching lines were parallel across the whole drawing, that would kind of flatten out some of the volumes. It would be more of a graphic shape. It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. That graphic shape is it's easier to see, so you would move through it more quickly. And then inversely, if we crosshatch with perpendicular lines, that's going to create a really dense, sort of a net that can really create really dark values, but also can slow you down visually. So in between the parallel and perpendicular ways of hatching is that contour hatching that follows the form and guides us through. It's not always clear the direction of the lines that we should be hatching. So here I'm kind of just following the movement of this fabric, kind of flowing down, almost like a river, down towards the hands at the bottom of the picture plane. It's not always clear, though, the direction that those lines should be going in. So think about what it is you're drawing and what it's doing. I think I've mentioned before that when we draw, we can capture not just what a thing looks like, but what it's doing compositionally, like how it relates to the shapes around it. There's this big cuff of the sleeve here wrapping around that foreshortened forearm coming towards us, and we can just barely see that hand holding onto the other hand. So if you're unsure about the direction that those hatching lines can be going in, ask yourself, what is this element doing? How is it serving the composition? This whole dark area right here with the shoulder down through the bottom right corner of the picture plane is mostly in shadow. It's very dark. It's there really to support the portrait up here. So we just want to be conscious of the purpose of these different elements, and they might be different for everyone. Remember that your drawing is going to be a record of not just what you see, but how you see it. And that can change even for an individual throughout the course of the process of drawing. So you'll see in this demo, the directions of my hatching lines change on their own. So as you try out the different modes of hatching, I'd also recommend testing it out on a separate piece of paper just to get a feel for it. But think about how light or dark something is, but also think about how light or heavy it might feel. How it might look sort of thin and we can move through it kind of quickly, or it might look a little more dense or complex and we'll move through it more slowly. When we focused on line quality in the beginning of the semester, we talked a lot about fast and slow and the gravity of a line. So we can revisit those concepts here, but also apply what we've learned about value and composition and form. With hatching, we're juggling all of those things at once. And it takes some practice. You might make some mistakes and you'll feel like you can't go back because it's in ink. That's okay. I'm already running into some proportion issues. But just for the sake of the exercise, keep thinking about the general big picture composition, how all these shapes relate to each other on an abstract level. It's going to be really tempting and easy to get pulled into the face and all of the details and folds and wrinkles of the skin and the shadows. We don't want to ignore that, but we don't want to spend all of our time there, because I'm really interested in the flow of this composition and how all these shapes guide us around. I'm using all these larger, longer lines down in the bottom right corner. Even though it's dark, I know that compositionally it's there to direct me up towards the face. So if I keep those lines pretty parallel, I can darken it without making it too dense or too heavy. It'll still operate as a dark shape, but it's not full-on cross-hatching, because I'm trying to send the viewer upward through the fabric of the shirt and then into the portrait. And then the background behind the head too should also feel pretty light. Not light value-wise, but light as in the weight of the air around his head, if that makes any sense. So you can see these parallel lines are more spaced out. There's a little bit more light hitting the hands. Not quite as much as the face, and I'm sure that was a choice to glaze over that area and have a little bit of hierarchy to show that we're looking at the face first and then maybe the hands as a secondary character in the painting. But it's important to recognize even now at this stage that the hands are just a little bit darker, so there's some really light hatching across there, even though it's acting as a light shape. Same here on the shoulder. There's light hitting the shoulder, but when I squint, that light on the shoulder's not nearly as bright as the light on the face. It appears lighter than it is because of the shadows on either side of it. Same goes for the hat up here. There is a light and shadow pattern on the hat, but when I squint, the hat as a whole is pretty dark. So keep backing up, keep looking at the big picture. As I work on the background here, you'll see that the hatching lines are all pretty parallel, but there's more space in between them. The lines are also a lot lighter and thinner because I'm using a lot less pressure, but having more space between the lines, there's more like air between them. They're going to appear a little bit lighter. If you're having trouble controlling your values and creating light and shadow shapes with the hatching marks, you could try making a simple 3 or 5 step value scale just to get a feel for how the illusion of light and shadow can be made by all these parallel and overlapping lines. Now that the picture plane is mostly, it feels complete even if it's not finished. I've considered every area, including the background, so now I'm going in and just starting to layer everything, and it'll just be a couple passes through all these different zones. The more I layer and weave these lines into each other, there will be more depth created. The value spectrum will get a little bit broader, and all these forms will be a little bit more defined. It can definitely feel a little monotonous covering a large area like this. One of the hardest things to do in drawing and painting, I think, is to make an area of a composition like this shirt or jacket or whatever. Make this large area support the whole composition without distracting from it. Like, let's say if the focal point is the portrait, or even within the portrait, it might be across the brow in the eyes, and maybe within the eyes, it's just that one eye that's a little bit closer to us on the right. The whole painting is guiding us into that shadow of the eye socket right next to the eyeball and the eyelid. It's easy to just underestimate the importance of this area down here in the bottom left. So yeah, it might feel like a lot of work of just layering with these lines in all these different areas that we feel like they might not matter as much, but every square inch of your drawing does matter. There is a hierarchy of like our attention. We want to focus on the portrait, but don't underestimate the importance of all these shapes and the care that it requires to make them do what they need to do. If anything, I think it's easier to make something, to give something that's complex like a face all of your attention, but to put your attention on something simple like the background or the fabric and to really get it right takes a different kind of consideration. You got to just detach from the content of the picture and just zoom out and approach it as just a bunch of shapes, just like we talked about last week. So if you're doing this Rembrandt master copy, or if you're working on any other master copy this week, I'll leave that choice up to you, but just make sure you're thinking about the whole picture. Definitely give those focal points all the love and attention they deserve. Just don't underestimate what the rest of the picture's doing and how these hatching lines can really unify the whole image. And think of it less as drawing a hat or a face and an ear with hair and a jacket, but think of it more as drawing the forms and what they're doing and how the light is affecting them. So as I go into the portrait here, I want to keep the lines pretty light. And like I said earlier, it's not so much about drawing the individual features, whether it's the nose or the facial hair or the lips or the eyeballs or the eyelids. It's less about the separateness of all of those different features and more about just what the light is doing and how that creates form. If you think of the head as a sphere, the highlight of a sphere is the closest point to the light source. So it looks like that highlight or the brightest bright on the head is going to be somewhere on the forehead, right below that cast shadow on the right side. So everything sort of like after that, down below from that, is going to be just a little bit darker, even if it's in a light shape itself. Here in the eye socket, it's getting pretty small and complex, so I'm trying to be really careful of these tiny little shapes here. We'll talk about head construction in a few weeks, but pay close attention to the shadows created by the plane changes in the eye socket and how the eye fits into there. Even if you're zoomed in on the reference, make sure you keep squinting and just thinking about what's in the direct light and what's in shadow and what might be in between in more of a form shadow zone. Those wrinkles under the eye, even though they look dark, they're really kind of in the lighter part of the face on the cheekbone there. So don't overestimate that darkness. They appear darker than they are because they're surrounded by light. So as I pass through here, I'm just trying to darken whatever larger shapes need to be a little bit darker. Looking back and forth from the reference to my drawing, squinting a lot, thinking about what areas I could push a little bit further. How that contrast I can create is going to help guide us around the picture plane. Some really very subtle form shadows in the light shapes on the face. It's going to be really easy to do too much in that area, so I'm being really careful. The really light touch with that pen. A lot of these values in the background are pretty similar to the values on the fabric of that jacket and on the shoulder. So in a way, it doesn't matter too much what's background and what's the shoulder. They're kind of operating in a similar way just to frame the portrait. So I can get a similar effect with hatching as I create this world that's like made out of all these overlapping and interweaving lines. So have fun experimenting with this. If you prefer to do multiple smaller studies versus one longer, larger master copy like this, you can do that too, but master copies are a really helpful way to learn from a master painter that you admire. So take your time. This kind of drawing requires lots of that, lots of time. So don't try to rush. Keep in mind this video is sped up a little bit. Experiment with different tools and different line qualities and just the different varieties of texture and form and value you can get, and think about how movement can be created. Good luck and have fun, and I'll talk to you next week.